We're going to be starting this Seder with a Shiur. Yesterday I gave you the papers for two topics, for Shinui Mare and for ice, making mikvah of ice or snow. The poil today, I realized if I'm going to make the Shiur on both topics, it's going to be much longer than regular Shiur. Maybe I decided to split it into two. So when we Shiur today and a Shiur tomorrow, they're both not going to be as long. They're not going to be over an hour. It's going to be less than an hour, each one. And that's what we're going to speak about today. Today we're going to speak about Shinui Mare. And tomorrow, ice and snow and how to make a mikveh from those. Practical. There is a Gemara in Maseches Kolel, which says, same pasuk that we know where we learn all the dinim of mikvahs from, which we learned in Teres Kanim. We're going to get to Teres Kanim in a second. There is, the Gemara says, Achmayon u'boir mikveh mayim yiyatoir. The Gemara says, Hani in mili achrin aloi. Ach boir, only mayim boir mikveh mayim, that's yiyatoir, you can make a mikveh. But anything else, no. And the Gemara says, maybe, the Gemara basically concludes there's three mi'utim. There's mayon, boir, and mikveh. Mayon is mayim. Boir is mayim. Mikveh is mayim. Why do you need all three? So he says, the Gemara says, one is to say that it has to be mayim, but not shar mashkim. One is to say for zeichlin, for the din of zeichlin, that the mikveh can't be a zeichel. And the third one is that we would think that dam is like water. Dam is cold water in some places. And the third one says, mayim v'loy dam. The Toras Kohanim, which we spoke about in the introduction Shiur, it says there is there's four limudim over there. The fourth one from the pasuk of mikveh mayim, of this pasuk that we speak about. He says, mikveh mayim, loy mikveh kol mashkim kulam. Mikveh made from water, but not a mikveh from other liquids. There's a machlekes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. What's poisel a mikveh? If made tzvayim is poisel a mikveh. And if it's poisel b'shlei shalugin, if it's poisel b'shinui mare, Rabbi Yossi says that made tzvayim is poisel b'shlei shalugin, but not poisel b'shinui mare. Yeah, that's how the halacha is, like we saw in Shulchan Aruch. There is a machlekes if this limud of Shinui Mare is derabanan or deraisa. One approach is the pasuk is an asmachta to it's from derabanan, and the pasuk is only an asmachta to it. And the second opinion is it's deraisa. The Beis Yosef brings the Ravid, which the Ravid holds that is a Rabbanon. He says that and what's the reason why they made this gzeira of Shinui Mare? Because people are going to, it looks like a mikveh of shar mashkim. If a mikveh changes its color, it looks like a mikveh of shar mashkim. And people are going to make a mistake and think that you could toivel in a mikveh l'chatchila that has shar mashkim. That's the Ravid. Other Rishonim, like the Ritva, for example, says that it's midaraisa. There is a Gulas Ilyas which goes through this topic, and although a lot of times the Gulas Ilyas makes a pirush in the Mishnayos, this Gulas Ilyas that I brought over here has a lot lahalacha lemaisa, and he writes lahalacha. He writes it's lahalacha lemaisa, which is why it's important. This Gulas Ilyas has a lot of important yesodis which are relevant to what we're going to discuss in the continuation of the Shiur. The Gulas Ilyas, the first one I printed for you, is on Perek Zayin Mishnah Gimel, Piska Aleph. So Mishnah Gimel, it's about 3 pages. That's the one that goes, it's the first 3 pages. That's the Gulas Ilyas on Perek Zayin Mishnah Gimel, and it's called Piska Aleph. That's the first section of it. It has 3 oisias in it. I'm going to explain the Yesodis of the Gulas Ilyas, but not in the order that he said. I want to explain it a little bit differently. I'm going to go Beis, Gimel, and then Aleph. and you'll see soon why. And I'm going to summarize them. I'm not going to read it word for word. I'm going to summarize the main nekudas that he has. In Ois Beis, he explains, first of all, he goes to explain that it's clear that Shinui Mare is the Rabbanon, not the Raisa. And the Gzeire, like the Ravid says, that they're going to think that this is like Shar Mashkim, and Toivel in the mikveh of Shar Mashkim, which is possible. You can't Toivel in the mikveh of juice or Shar Mashkim. Only Toivel in the mikveh of water. If someone's going to see a colored mikveh, he's going to think this is wine, this is grape juice. Next time, you could Toivel in the mikveh, it's fully grape juice. So that's why that's the Gzeire. That's one reason. The second reason is, we know, and we learned in Halacha, that a mikveh which has roiv of shar mashkim is possible. That means even if you have a big mikveh, and then you have much more of other liquids,
even in a situation you have 47.
Yeah, then that mikveh is possible. The only mikveh which does not become possible with a lot is a water mikveh. If you have a mikveh of make shamim, you could add on top of it as much she'uvim as you want. Kosher mikveh, 40 self make shamim, you add on top of it as much mayim she'uvim as you want, it does not become possible. But if you add shar mashkim, they overwhelm it, they become a roiv, and the mikveh is possible. So, and that mikveh, tvila and shar mashkim, is possible in a Torah. Right? In a regular mikveh, the water that gets added to it becomes zriya. Zriya is the regular water, mayim she'uvim, they go into the make shamim, they become nizra, and everything becomes kosher. But may peiris, may shar mashkim, they do not become nizra. Therefore, it overwhelms it, and it becomes a possible mikveh. And that's the chashash is that if they're going to see such a mikveh, which is color, they're going to think, we'll taivel in the mikveh, they're going to be taiveling in the mikveh, which is rabu, which has more, which is possible in a Torah. So bepoil, if it's only shini mar, it's midrabanon. The chashash is that it has two chashashes deraisa. One chashash is taiveling in the complete mikveh of shar mashkim, or taiveling in the mikveh where the shar mashkim is a majority over the rainwater. Then the Gulas Ilias explains another interesting point, which is also important to understand over here when it comes to machlekes. The psul min haTorah in shar mashkim, mikveh of shar mashkim, which is possible in haTorah, is only in the 7 mashkim which are metame. Everybody knows the Rosh Tevis Yachach Adam, the 7 mashkim that could make something tamei. The Rosh Tevis Yachach Adam is yayin, dvash, shemen, cholov, tal, dam, and mayim. But mayim, we have a limud that you could make a mikveh from water when it's connected to the ground. So mayim is from the 7 mashkim, but it doesn't make it tamei. So to be able to have a mikveh which is possible midiraisa, it has to be from these 7 mashkim. But if you have something else which is not one of the 7 mashkim, for example, orange juice, which is mei peiris, or another kind of juice, not wine, then the psul is only midrabanan, not midiraisa. And the only reason why there are some opinions, then he goes to the whole discussion whether Taisvis, from Taisvis it's mashma that sham mashkim is also deraisa. And but he explains that really it's not deraisa, elamai, because you consider it a mashke, therefore it has a chshivas of a mashke, and it's possible like the shivas hamashke. Right? However, he says that even when shivas hamashkim, even in shar mei peiris, shar mashkim, which are not shivas hamashkim, he says, even though there's a mashmos from the Ravid that the shar mashkim are also metame, it's only when you squeeze it intentionally. But he concludes that the halacha is like divrei harambam, that all mei peiris do not have kabbalas tulam in a Torah, and therefore the puzzle for mikveh is only midrabanan. That means he adds another element over here, that to make a mikveh puzzle b'shar mashkim, it has to have also an element of roi l'kabalas tumah. Otherwise, if it's not roi to transfer tumah, it's one of the shivas mashkim, then midiraisa it does not make a mikveh puzzle. That's in Ois Beis and Ois Gimel. Then he has at the end of this section, he has a paragraph that starts Hayoytz Mizela Halacha, and this is a summary of Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. I'm just going to summarize the points which are important for what we just learned now. He says, first of all, Shinui Mare is possible only midirabanan. We know that already. Because of Exera, maybe there's going to be a mikveh which has a lot of meiperes, which have all of meshar mashkim that make it possible. And the second thing is sh'ar meiperes that are possible is only midirabanan because they're not one of the shiva mashkim, and they still possible b'shinui mare, but only midirabanan. And he concludes that paragraph that l'chayda, if it's the Rabbanon, then when you have a mikveh which is a safek rabo all of meiperes, have a safek if there's more meiperes or not, you have a big mikveh. It has 40 sav rainwater, and then somehow a pipe of meiperes, or whatever was it, exploded over there, and there's a lot of meiperes. Shaila is whether maybe you should say safek derabanan lekula, because it's a derabanan. And he says no. He says the only time you could be mekel is if she was already tovla v'shimsha. Tovla v'shimsha with another condition. That means if the shinui mare that happened in this mikveh from sha'ar mashkim is a shinui mare which is not so strong, that means it's enough to change the color of the water, but it's not enough that somebody should think it's orange juice. It means the mikveh it looks like diluted, that orange juice fell into it, so it's shinui mare, but it doesn't look a thick orange color. Then in such a case, because there's the whole chashash is going to be taya, and people are not going to be taya in such a thing, and it's only a derabanan. So if Tavla v'Shimsha, it's fine. She doesn't have to. Tavla v'Shimsha means that she went to mikveh and she came back home. So she doesn't have to go back to mikveh. Now we're going to go back to Ois Aleph. Ois Aleph is that he over there in Ois Aleph he says a very important yesod. There, we'll give you an introduction. There's a machlokes whether we know that in Shulchan Aruch meitzvoim is not poisel. Is not poisel. What does meitzvoim mean? What's the reason of meitzvoim? Because if you put something into the mikveh and it just gives color to the mikveh, but there's no mamashus, then it's fine. So the Gula Silia starts in Ois Aleph and says from the Raiva that's mashma in Balei Nefesh that not only meitzvoim could be poisel mikveh and shinui mare, because we say if it has a mamashus. Also, it says if you have something which is a dover gush, a solid thing of color, which fell into the mikveh and colored the mikveh while it was there, it means you didn't pour a colored liquid. You dropped a like a bar of some sort which fell into the mikveh, a red bar, and it colored the mikveh, dissolved into the mikveh. It's also poisel b'shinui mare. The only way is if this solid thing goes into the mikveh and gives color to the mikveh but did not dissolve at all, then it's fine. Because then the water doesn't have the actual goof of the color. It got colored from what you dropped into the mikveh, but it doesn't have an actual goof of color. So it's made tzvaim, so it's fine.
Chlorine.
We'll get to chlorine soon. That's the whole introduction. That's what this whole part is about. Is to get to chlorine. So that's why we say in the Mishnah, according to Ravid, when you wash baskets of hediach salazeisim, when you wash baskets of olives into a mikveh and it changed the color of the mikveh, it's not paisel. Because into the mikveh, you didn't get something which actually changes the color of the mikveh. It's something which the water changed colors, but it's not because in it there is a mamoshus of color. Same thing is the mashma from the Eshkel and also from the Rashba, other Rishonim which hold that even if that's something which gets colored, even if there's actual color or color which dissolves into the mikveh, it becomes pasul. However, Kolel says that from the Rambam it's not mashma like that, because the Rambam in Perek Zayin of Hilchos Mikvah says, Kol davar shenosim bo mikveh lechatchila paisas hamikveh b'shinui mare keitzad hayayin o yacholav v'hadam v'kayotze bohem mimei peiris. Basically, he uses the lashon, what makes a psul and shinui mare, things that you could make from them a mikveh. However, color, you can't make a mikveh from it. So therefore, you have a solid piece of color, you can't make a mikveh from it. So therefore,
Orange juice, let's say.
Orange juice is mepedes.
It's not in Kabbalah.
It's not in Kabbalah right now. We're talking about whether it's poisel, even orange, mepedes is poisel, it's not a Kabbalah, it's poisel mederabanan, only if it's mederabanan derais, it's still poisel, b'shinui mare.
You're saying only a liquid is what I'm saying?
Only
a liquid possible b'shinui mare?
Yeah. Only a liquid possible b'shinui mare, and only those which, if there would be a mikveh from them, would become mikveh pasul, like the ones that the Chachamim said, yain, chalav, and all these things. But meitzvayim, he says, even meitzvayim, you can't make from it a mikveh, and it doesn't become pasul b'shinui mare. And when you have color which dissolves into a mikveh, in those days they had certain colors, you could tell the difference between something which is color and something which is a juice. And you will be able to know whether nobody's going to think that this is a mepedes mikveh or a shar mashke mikveh. So there's no element of tos, of mistake over here. So therefore, l'chayra, the gzeira would not apply. So therefore he holds that when you have, he says, it's mashma from the Rambam, there's something dissolves inside the mikveh, it doesn't make the mikveh pasul. So therefore, but if it dissolves before it goes into the mikveh, if you dissolve color into liquid before it goes into the mikveh, then according to the Meir and the Mishnah it would be pasul, because he's pasul mitzvahim. According to Rabbi Yossi, which you follow halacha, it's not. And he adds, he concludes, the mikveh, shenishtane mar'isa, that a mikveh which changed its look, through dissolving indich, which is probably the indigo color, the blue one, oy tzervitz, I don't know which color that is, probably also another natural color, or if it changed from water, which made tseva, which in them have dissolved color, still a mikveh ksheira kedas Rambam. So mei tseva is not like the Ravid says, or the other ones say that it's color, it's water which got colored, but it has no mamashos of color. Mei tseva also includes water which has mamashos of a color inside. And he says the same thing in the end of the Hayotzim Mizeh L'Maaseh. He also discusses that. He says, "Samanim shenei moicho einam poisim b'shinui mare." He has a suffix on wine. He says that it seems like he says in Russia, or wherever he was, the winemakers, if the wine wasn't dark enough, they would add color to it to make it darker, a deeper red. So he says maybe this wine is made tseva. It's not, because the whole reason why it's coloring the mikveh is because of the color. The majority, the color, the red color. It's not the color of wine. It's the color of the salmonim. Chayre should be fine. So he ends in that paragraph. He says that if the mikveh became shinui mare because of wine which has in it food coloring, then in shasat chak it could be tevil lechatchila. Not only tevil b'shimsha, but lechatchila. In a shasat chak it becomes lechatchila. To tevil in such a mikveh that got colored from wine which has food coloring inside. as long as the water does not look mamish like wine. It means it looks like wine was dissolved. So now, why did I give you this whole introduction, this whole glucilius? Because the question that Rabbi Man over here asked about chlorine. One of the ways of cleaning a mikveh, of keeping a mikveh clean, is with chlorine. It means not clean as in like it shouldn't look dirty, but clean that it shouldn't have any bacteria in it. Chlorine kills the bacteria. And when you add chlorine to water, it kills all the bacteria and it'll separate. It makes when the filter cleans the water, it's easier for it to take the dead bacteria that's already there and take it out of the water, or any other pieces which are floating in the water. Now, when you add chlorine to the mikveh, unless you're a real professional, you're definitely going to change the color of the water, even if you add clear chlorine, because chlorine changes the acidity level of water. That's why you have those testers in pools. They test the acidity of the water and to see whether it's sometimes it's too high, sometimes it's too low. If you don't know what you're doing, even if you're not mamash a professional, chances are that adding chlorine to the mikveh, the water of the mikveh is going to change a little bit or a lot. Either you'll change it a little bit white, or you might make the whole mikveh cloudy, or you make it a different color. But you definitely, and then it clears up very fast. You balance the pH, and it clears, and it goes back to being clear water. You put something else in, yeah. I don't remember the other thing you put into it. You put into it, you balance it out. So a lot of times, you also have other things you put into a mikveh, other liquids to help clean the mikveh, which come in blue, green, colored liquids. You pour them into the mikveh, and the color changes. Sometimes the chlorine itself has color in it, so it shouldn't be clear. The regular, plain chlorine in its natural form is clear.
It's a tablet.
Huh?
It's a tablet. It's a hard thing.
Some of them, if it's liquid, the tablet is much better. That's what we're going to get to soon. Yeah. So there are certain poskim today in this generation which say that if you have colored chlorine or other liquids, and this colored chlorine, the reason why it's colored is because it has meitzeva. It's only absorbed into color, it doesn't have real color in it. Then it doesn't make them a good puzzle. But if this colored chlorine has real color in it, actual color, it makes it a puzzle. But Shinui Mare.
The whole question is only once while the colors change. After it's clear.
After it's clear, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, but that looks like a basic. So it's hard to do it.
No, because it's mamoshes of tzeva.
I think the way that the Rambam explains.
Okay.
Okay, so it should be with it.
It depends. Everybody holds the lachas like a basic.
The way
If made seva changes the color of the mikveh also. The question is, this is what he says. If it's made seva, it's not a problem. But what's the definition of made seva? According to that's the way the Gulasius explains it. But not everybody understands like this Gulasius.
How do you know if it's coloring or if it's actual emotions? Like what's mamash? What's coloring?
Mamoshes is if you have powder that you put, or concentrated liquid that comes from the companies when they make artificial food coloring. It comes in a chemical liquid, which could burn your hands. And that color, or it comes in powder form, that's mamoshes of color. Meitzeva is something which is only colored because it had in it soaked something which is colored. You're going to put colored leaves into certain leaves into a cup of water. The water will change color. You put beets. Huh?
What about the cloud part?
The what?
The fact that it changed the color.
So one of the people I saw from this generation says that if it becomes cloudy, then he also thinks to be machmer until it clears up. And the other poskim which have a discussion how to be matir the chlorine bichlal. Some people say that it's because the mikveh mayim, Rabbi Yirmiyah Katz, who wrote books on mikvahs, he says that the reason is the chlorine itself doesn't change the color of the water. That means it's not that the chlorine has in it a color which makes the water, which colors the water. it causes the water to by itself change colors. And water that changes by itself is not a problem. It's a reaction which causes the water to change color. That's his view why chlorine is fine. Huh? The chlorine causes a reaction in the water, chemical reaction, which causes the water to look different.
But it's not really.
It's the chlorine itself is not colored. So something which is clear can't color something which is clear.
Who says that?
Mikveh Mayim. Yirmiyah Katz. He's the biggest mumche in mikvah today. Smach Masatzmai. Then there's an Israeli svara. The chlorine in Israel comes from Yam HaMelech. So it comes from, that's where they produce a lot of the chlorine from Israel. It's a salt. Chlorine is a salt. They produce it from Yam HaMelech. So it's next to Yam HaMelech. They produce it. Therefore, it comes from the water. It comes from the water. That's kosher. It doesn't make water puzzle. And that's the svara, the Israeli svara, and Rabbi Yashiv was masking to that svara. And then you have the Minchas Yitzchak, for example. He says that Bichlal, there's no shinui mare by chlorine. He was asked a question by somebody who does mikvahs, and he told him there's no shinui mare by chlorine. So he says there's no shinui mare, it's fine. How exactly is that possible? I don't know. Could be they didn't put enough chlorine to make a change. I don't know. That's what he paskins. However, when you look at from the Gulas Ilias, it's much easier. Because if it's something which dissolves inside the mikveh, if you take a tablet which dissolves inside the mikveh or the pellets of chlorine, it's for sure not a problem, even if it has mamashos of color. If it dissolves in the mikveh, it's not a problem.
Why not?
Why
not?
The Gulas Ilias says that you're not going to make a mistake to toivel and meitzeva. Therefore, according to the Rambam, there is no isser, and he says even if something color dissolves inside the mikveh, solid color dissolves inside the mikveh, it's not a problem.
Liquid?
It's not a liquid. It's never a liquid. Chlorine is a solid.
I'm saying if you have a solid, but it starts off as a liquid, and then they make it.
They don't make it until it starts off as a powder.
A bar of soap, for example. Colored bar of soap.
Colored bar of soap.
Doesn't matter if it's a liquid, and they can feel it. And it turns them in. So, in other words, theoretically, what would the Gulas time over there?
The Gulas Ilias is if something which dissolves inside the mikveh, something which is solid dissolves inside the mikveh, it's not a problem.
You have to take one solid. What if it starts as a liquid? Still no data?
There is exerat of shinui mare, sure. The whole the meitzvahim depends. Sometimes it is place of the mikveh.
No, he's saying what if they have a solid that started off as a liquid?
I don't know.
Like a bar of soap.
I mean, a bar of soap. The Ar Paiskim would say
As a liquid, and
there are Paiskim would say that bar of soap makes it impossible. They don't make this differentiation between liquid and solid.
Why did you finish with that, Ivan?
Why are we not chayshish for that, Ivan? The Gulas Ilias says that you follow the Rambam lahalacha, and so we don't have to be chayshish for him. Gulas Ilias paskins like I'm not chayshish for him.
If a person gets dirty, if the maker gets dirty from dirt to a person, it's okay. But a situation that he goes, let's say, takes a shower before, the end is still soap in it.
That doesn't change anything. Soap is bubbles. It doesn't change. It don't change the color.
Soap makes it into
Very little. It's not going to change. Not going to change
If
much.
you have 20 people going every second, it's going to change it. My question: the soap is it considered like chlorine, or it's considered like
Soap is liquid. I guess it's l'chayr issue. It could be an issue. Yeah. Anyways, people would say there are some would say so. Therefore, the best would be to use dry chlorine tablets, chlorine pellets. Don't use any liquids in the mikveh. But be'etzem, there's no problem with it, whether it is pellets or it is a liquid. Chlorine be'etzem doesn't cause the mikveh, doesn't cause the chlorine be'etzem is clear in its natural form if it's in a liquid without any coloring, so it does not cause a problem. So today we use chlorine without a problem, whether it's pellets, whether it's not. But if somebody wants to dafka use pellets, it's not a problem.
The fact that it's cloudy is not an issue.
That's the swara that becomes cloudy. Even way, it's cloudy for very little. But regardless, it only caused it by something which is nemoyach in it. Even if you're going to say it comes from the chlorine, change the color, there was nemoyach inside of it, and made seven, doesn't make it possible. Huh?
change the color, I care about it even for a second. No?
And then it goes back to kosher.
What do you mean? If the mikvah is, so what's the difference between chlorine and chlorine? In any situation, it will be okay, no?
Yeah.
Also, it would be.
Yeah, but nobody pours on a regular basis grape juice into the mikveh. Chlorine, they do.
What about these like bath bombs that connect like a bubble bath to make a mikvah?
To make bubbles in the mikveh, the chayrish, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't change the color.
No, but then they have this color one. They can make it like.
I don't know. I never tried it to see what change it will do. There is an interesting tshuva, was written by Rabbi Yonasan Steif in his tshuvas about, I didn't put it in the book, regarding rusty pipes. I was asked about rusty pipes in New York, and the water coming out of it, the mayo either coming out of it brown, or back in those days there was a lot of soot from all the pollution, a lot of black soot, that if rain would fall, would come down with black pieces in it. Or lead in your pipes, then also bring black pieces into it. So he has two chuvas. One is about rust, one is about lead. One's about rust, one's about lead and soot. It's not part of the rain. It's on your roof. And it gets washed into your mikveh, and your water comes in black, and it takes time till it settles in the bottom. So shaila is if it's a problem while it's not settled yet. So he says, being that rust does not become nimoyach, does not dissolve into water, and soot does not dissolve into water, and lead does not dissolve into water. So all that doesn't dissolve into water. So even though right now those little particles are inside the mikveh, it's going to take a while till it soaks down to the bottom, the mikveh is kosher. But like we said, according to Gula, it makes a difference. Even if it would be dissolved, it wouldn't be a problem. I'm just saying, pointing out there is, because the dissolved color is not a problem.
Didn't change the color of the water.
It does. The color that your water looks until it settles. Yeah, sure. You never saw brown water coming out of a sink. Yeah. What is the shiur for shinui mara? I was asked this yesterday. What's the amount of shinui mara? The Beis Yosef says from the Ravid, ein shiur l'shinui mara, even lug echad, even from lug echad nishtane, marav pasol. Neshach sifkat nesamach dalad also brings it like that, without bringing anybody who disagrees with it. The Lashon HaShulchan Aruch and Sif Chafei is nishtanu shinu marav mikmois shehoya, change from what it was. And the Shach over there also brings in the Ravid, nishtanu mimare mayim shehoya v'tchila, change from the color of water that it had originally. So there isn't really a shiur. However, from the Gulas Ilis I just mentioned to you, he says the whole svara is to make aser shinui mara is because they're going to make a mistake and think it is something else. So the cha'ira, the shiur should be enough of a change that makes a difference, that you could see a difference. Not stam just a little bit of change tam marav, but again, we're not going to go against the Shulchan Aruch and the Shach on that. And it depends, It's not a problem. It's not there isn't really a shiur. I can tell you what's the shiur of measuring how much it changes, but it depends on the Rav Meir. We'll see the mikvah. We'll tell you if the water changed from it before or not.
Basically, in that situation, any Rav would say differently?
I guess so. If it changes from itself, if the water changed by itself, that's I think there's a chibur l'tara that says it makes no difference how much changes. First of all, water by itself changes color with time. More than that, water itself, it depends where it comes from, has different colors. Depends on how it is. It's all water is clear, but on what color or what the way it is, it could change a little bit. The pace depends on the time. So if the water changes by itself, it's not a problem. So now we'll get to what I gave you some tzedek yesterday about the wine kashering a mikveh with wine. Yeah, but etzem, this is really negeya to a mikveh which is made on top of a mayan or a be'er that continuously pumps water. If you have Now we're going to deal with how to make a mikveh be'erel at some point down the line. Probably we'll give you a share on that, but I'm not going to get to it right now. Let's go. There's a Shulchan Aruch in Sif Chav Gimel writes, Im hoya gimel lugin. If you had 3 lugin on the side of the mikveh, let's say 3 lugin of shuvim, and into these 3 lugin fell wine, and these 3 lugim right now look like wine. That means they changed and they look like wine. These shleisha lugin are no longer shleisha lugin of mayim shuvim. They are shleisha lugim of something which looks like wine. And therefore, if that falls into a mikveh chaseda, it doesn't make it possible. If it will be shleisha lugin shuvim, it will make it possible. But this doesn't make it possible. However, the Shach right away says that if this shleisha lugim that look like wine are so strong in the color and they fall into a mikveh and they change the color of the mikveh, it's not possible to touch shuvim, it's possible to touch mare. That's a separate thing. It's not possible to touch shuvim. Now, what's the difference if something is possible to touch mare and touch shuvim? Very big afkamina. If it's mare, then the moment it goes back to color of water, whichever way you get it, means you add more water to it. Now, by the way, just mentioning it aside, I didn't bring it over here, but the Gulas Ilias has a whole long pilpul. If a mikveh which had in it 21 se'ah of rainwater, and it became possible from shinui mare, if you add to it 19 se'ah of she'uvim, he brings a svara that it does become kosher. She'uvim shem shichur, it does become kosher. Because right now, it's a different category of a mikveh. It's not a mikveh which has make shalom, it's a mikveh which is possible mitzat shinui mare. If you're mashlim it, and these 19 se'ah become part of the water, and they make the mikveh right now back to being clear, doesn't make the mikveh possible. We're not going to get into it now. It's a very long.
With 15 se'ah, then it's still chassid, and you add last little bit, and it's possible.
Yeah. You have to be careful how much you have. Huh? No, even if it's not shim shichur. I'm saying if you add shuvim, not shim shichur. I meant to say not shim shichur. Shuvim that were not nimshach. Shuvim without nimshach. Yeah. So now, if you have shinui mare, you can kasher it by changing the color back. Add water until it changes the color, but if it's mitzad gimelugim, you have to drain out. You have to make sure that enough water goes in to take out. When you have a mikveh mayim that's continuously flowing, you can't drain out the mikveh. Because as much as you're going to drain it out, there's more water going to continue coming from the mayim. So if this mikveh that's on top of a mayim became possible from shleisha lugin, which are some opinions like that, the mikveh becomes possible. A mikveh on top of a mayim becomes possible with shleisha lugin. First, in the beginning. Depends how, if you expanded it, that's a whole discussion we went back in the beginning. If a mayan, when you expand its original boundaries, if it's still a mayan or it's only mayan water that's in a new place. Yeah, so you can't practically, when you make a mikveh mayan, you can't really drain it and dry it to get rid of the shleisha lugin. So how do you solve this thing when you have shleisha lugin? Right? So now, that's the question. Now you have another sif in Shulchan Aruch.
Why did it place on the water?
What?
It's not place on the water, no?
What? Shleisha lugim a place of the mikveh.
The Mayan?
Yeah. That's the opinion. Shleisha lugim a place of this mayan, yeah. Not the mayan that's in the ground, where the water is collecting. If you have shleisha lugim and then you have a mayan coming on top of it, then that water is not kosher for table. Shleisha lugim came first. Yeah. Now, what happens if you have, just an aside, you have shleisha lugim, because we're discussing on shleisha lugim that changed color to marayayin, right? What happens if it doesn't change to marayayin? It changed color, but it didn't change to marayayin. The lashon of Shulchan Aruch is v'harei mar'e marayayin. You added wine to the shleisha lugim, and the wine became marayayin. Looks like wine. So the second gulas ilis I brought to you. It's only one paragraph. The Perek Zayin Mishnah Hey. It's on the fourth page. It's a short paragraph. The paragraph starts shleisha lugim. He explains that if these shleish lugim got wine in them and they changed color, but they did not become Mariyayin, those shleish lugim are still considered she'uvim and make a mikveh puzzle. That means to be able to change the shleish lugim from a category of she'uvim to a category of something which does not make it puzzle, you have to have enough of a change that it should be called wine. And how does he define what wine is? He says you have to ask what the people say. He says if people consider it like diluted wine, yain mazug, it's still in the category of wine, then it's considered wine. If that's the color of diluted wine, it's fine. But if it's lighter than that, it's not.
Is there something that Shuchat say that he says that the whole reason of Shinui Mara is because people think that it's...
Yeah, because only the abundant people are going to make a mistake. So now you have a chumrah the other way.
Since you pass them, we don't pass them like we pass them in the shot, so...
Maybe we don't pass Shiur, pass like him.
Which means you're supposed to be making like him already?
Make like him in for chlorine, yeah.
You said that since the Machar and the Shach don't say that, so...
We're not going to be makel against any shita. So you're asking what the halacha is. The halacha is, yeah, like the Gulasilius. I'm saying it's his shua over here, we're going to be machmer like him. Because his svara also gives you a chumrah. The chumrah is that you have, his svara gives you a chumrah. If it changed only a little bit, it still makes it possible. So the question that comes up, which is what I brought you in front of Tzedek, is you have a mikveh which was missing water, less than 40 sa, and it became possible shleish lugim. Regular mikveh make shamim, or a mayim which has gimel lugim batchila. So in such a situation, you have to take out all the water, drain it, dry it, or add more water till it comes out. But if you can't do it like in a mayim, what are you going to do? Could you add to it wine to change the matter of it, and then you add to it wine and you make it a now it's a shinui mara, it's a new category, it's a mikveh pasuk of a shinui mara, it's not anymore she'uvim. Then you're going to add more rainwater to it until it clears up. It's no longer, and then it's kosher. You don't have to drain anything out.
What do you get?
You have a mikveh that you can't drain out because there's a mayan over there. So you'll never be able to kasher it from the shleish lugim that are there. There's no way of calculating how much came out. Or being mechashev, it's not going to come out. And even if you're going to drain all the water out, the mayan will still continue pushing it up. So you'll never be able to dry the mikveh that shouldn't be to get rid of the shleish lugim.
Can't do the 8 of the Loy.
You don't know the cheshbon. You have shleish lugim shekodmi. You have to make the cheshbon based on how much goes in, how much goes out. You have to know how much goes in, goes out, and the mayan is not going to overflow. It hits a certain level and it stops. A mayan, if a mayan which doesn't come out of its source, it just goes. It's a mayan which reaches a certain level. It will stop the moment it hits the level of water in the earth around it. It's not going to go higher than that. So let's say it's going to be the water around it is 2 feet below the earth. You're going to dig a mayan down. The mayan is going to come up, hit the level of 2 feet below earth level, and that's what's going to stop. You're going to drain out of it everything, all the buckets. You're not going to be able to get it dry. At that moment, the water will right away push up again. As fast as you're going to drain out, you're not going to be able to get every drop out.
Isn't that it's up there?
We go to the earth, yeah. That's what I mentioned yesterday, yeah. So could you now take this mikveh, you add to it wine, it's no longer a she'uvim. Right now, it's a mikveh, which is shinui mara, it's a new gather, it's wine. Panim chadashos. Maybe that's enough to make it kosher. Not to make it kosher, to make it ois she'uvim, and then when you're going to add new water into it, you're not adding water on top of a she'uvim mikveh, apostle she'uvim. You're adding water on top of a shinui mara. And to change from shinui, it means you change its status from apostle machmas she'uvim to apostle machmas shinui mara. And when you change the status, it's much easier to make kosher from a shinui mara than to make kosher from a she'uvim. So at Tzemach Tzedek, in the tshuva which you had yesterday and today also, Kufayin Gimel, just in the beginning of the tshuva, he says, Nina devadei lemehani. It's clear doesn't help. Why? He gives a gather. This mikveh has in it a shem psul, has a name that is possible. Now you're going to add to a shinui mara, you're not changing the status of this mikveh. And he says, by the way, the Mishnah, when it talks about a mikveh, which is possible from shleish lugim, didn't tell you this idea of shinui mara. It's not a new thing. The Mishnah could have told you the same thing. When the Mishnah says you have to drink Melui V'Oi, the Mishnah could have just told you change the color and change it back. The Mishnah didn't say it, so obviously it doesn't work. What's the logic behind the svara? Yeah? Shinui Mare is a change in the halachic status of this liquid. That means if you have a mikveh chaser and you have shloisha lugin of shuvim next to it, now you go and you add wine to the shuvim, to shloisha lugin shuvim. These shloisha lugin shuvim changed status, halachic status. They were shuvim, now they are wine, similar to wine. Therefore, you created a change of status by adding the wine into it. If you have a mikveh which is kosher, it's full of water, and wine fell into it and changed the color, again, you created a change in the halachic status of this water. It went from being water to being something similar to wine, and now the mikveh became possible. Two things change: the category of the water and the category of the mikveh. When you add wine to a possible mikveh, you're not doing any change. So you're not doing any halachic change, any change in the gather of this water. It was possible before because of shuvim. Now you're going to say it becomes possible again because of shinui mare. What did you do with the wine? You did nothing. You didn't change any status. The only way you could change something to a wine, the reason the Shulchan Aruch, what we know, that wine changes status is only when it changes status. From kosher to puzzle, or from shuvim to not shuvim. But when you have something which adding wine, not changing the status, not changing the gather of it, then it doesn't have any effect. Doesn't make it. Then you can't do it to make it kosher because it's just shuvim which have wine in them. It's not a shinui mare. It's not a mikveh which now is possible from shinui mare and could be kosher through more water. It's a mikveh which is possible from shuvim and now also has wine. So therefore, it's not going to help you anything to add water because they're adding water to a mikveh shinui mare only helps when the shinui mare was what caused the water mikveh to become possible. So you solve the shinui mare problem. If the shinui mare made it possible, you solved the shinui mare, you made it kosher. Over here, the shinui mare didn't create the problem. The problem was shuvim. You add water to it, you add wine to it, nothing. You add water to the wine, you didn't do anything yet because you're not machshir from what it was before.
Is there a situation to be machshir? It's not be machshir, but through shuvim, my shuvim, like not shuvim, mikveh shuvim, through mare, to change the status from shuvim to shinui mare.
Shuvim to shinui mare, shuvim is shloisha lugim. What?
I have 40 cells of my shuvim.
Yeah.
Could I change the status of my shuvim to the dishes not shuvim, the dishes the mire, and then I could pour?
No, that's what he says now. He can't. He brings another svara. He says another reason that Tzemach Tzedek says. He says the shinui mare and shloisha lugim only makes it possible if it changed before it came into the mikveh. When you talk about shloisha lugim that changed, that you took she'uvim and changed their status, is only when the change of status happened outside the mikveh. That's what we know about. The shloisha lugim are outside the mikveh. You added wine to them, you changed your status outside the mikveh. You can't change she'uvim to non-puzzling water, because she'uvim, shloisha lugim, that you add wine to it, and it became like wine. It changed its status from she'uvim to marayayin. And now it doesn't make a mikveh puzzle. But that could only happen outside the mikveh. When it's inside the mikveh, if you have shloisha lugim fall into a mikveh chaser and right away you pour wine into it, you didn't do anything. Because you can't change she'uvim into wine when it's not inside the mikveh. When it's inside the mikveh, only outside the mikveh.
How does this work with mikveh shehigla?
He mentions mikveh shehigla. It says higla is a different limit. It's the only exception to the rule of she'uvim that could change status. He brings it in the Tshuva Tzemach Tzedek. That's the end of the. He brings it with the Derech and it says this.
But halacha we don't do that, right?
Halacha we don't do what?
Mine.
I don't know. We're not talking about it today. The Ramah brings the Raya in Seif from Seif Chavtes. And he brings the Tzemach Tzedek brings the Raya from Seif Chavtes. Mikveh chaser, which fell to it, the end of Sif Chavtes, that Ramah says, a mikveh chaser, that fell into it wine and it changed its shinui mare. It means it's rainwater, kosher rainwater, which changed its color, which became shinui mare with wine. And then afterwards, shloisha lugim mayim she'uvim fall onto it. It doesn't make it possible. Why? Why is that? Because again, the same svara. The same way you can't change a status of something twice when you're not changing its halachic status. You have a mikveh which is chaser. A mikveh chaser, you add to it mayim she'uvim, you make it possible. Shloisha lugim mayim she'uvim, you make the whole mikveh possible. If you have a mikveh chaser which became possible because you added wine to it. So right now, it was rainwater which became wine. Then made to wine. If you're going to add shloisha lugim of mayim she'uvim into it, you're not changing the status again. It's a mikveh posel machmas shinui mare. The fact that you add shloisha lugim mayim she'uvim don't change anything. It doesn't change. The only way mayim she'uvim could change something is when you add mayim she'uvim to water which is chaser, and you change it from kosher to posel. But over here, you're not changing it from kosher to posel. You want to change it from posel to posel, so it doesn't work. And it says the same svara we said before. It doesn't work over here either. You can't change posel to posel. A change of shinui mare or a change of lugim could only change a status from something which is kosher to posel, posel to kosher, not posel to posel.
You know, it's different degrees of psul. It's different degrees of psul. One of the easier to
Right. So here you see the other extreme. If you have a mikveh that has 21 se'ah or 25 se'ah of make shamim, and it became wine fell into it, and now it's shinui mare. That Ramah says, if you add shloisha lugim fall into it now, it will not make the mikveh puzzle. Those shloisha lugim are not going to make the rest of the water puzzle. Which means if you're going to want to make this mikveh kosher, you don't have to make milui v'ayid. You just add water until it clears the color, and you're fine. That's a tzemach tzedek shittim. It's not sheni of the chibur l'tahara. Obviously, we pass on tzemach tzedek, we mach like tzemach tzedek. It's a sheni of the chibur l'tahara. When?
You make it colored and then add.
What do we make color and shuvim? No, you add rainwater. You have to measure the 47. You have the chibur l'tahara, which I gave you yesterday in Kolel Aleph Sif Yudches. It's also here in today's booklet. He brings the pshitus lahalacha the way that you could do with wine. You could change with wine. And he concludes, he says over there, he's talking about a mayan. He says mikveh became possible in shloisha lugim in a way you can't change it if it fell into a mayan. He says lachatchila shoifchim leteich hamikveh yain echolav ashinstanu mara mayim. You lachatchila go and you add wine to change the color. Chibur Tahara says. And then these shuvim are no longer possible. You add more water and it's fine. And he brings in Sifla Meteza. That's how they were noyig in the city of Barditchev. We're going to get to the mocker of where we get to the city. What's in Barditchev exactly happened. And then at the end of Sif Yudches, he writes, "V'yesh ge'oinim shechmiru b'zeh." Some ge'oinim were machmer in it. And then he has 2 pages long. Obviously, he's talking about Tzemach Tzedek. You can't ignore his great uncle, Tzemach Tzedek. He brings him. And he discusses the shit of Tzemach Tzedek. First question he says is, Shuvin is Darabanan. Darabanan, if it's Darabanan, we should compare this to the din of Stam Yeinam. Stam Yeinam, we don't say that the first wine, if the Stam Yeinam in the bottom, and then more things became onto it, then everything that comes on top of it becomes bottled to the original one, and then everything is Tamei. Stam Yeinam is Darabanan, we say whether the Stam Yeinam was first or Stam Yeinam was at the end, it's still kosher. I mean, it's bottled. So he says, Zerabanan. So therefore, it should be here the same thing. That whether the wine came first or the shuvim came first, the gimel lugim, it still doesn't make it possible. And then he asks right away, how can you be mevatel it? L'chatchila, go ahead and do it. And then he says, be'etzim, here we're talking about a mayan. Mayan shinui mare doesn't really make it possible, so you're not really making any change into the mayan, so it's fine.
So that's what mine also are.
So that's what mikveh, probably a mayan. There's no mikveh to make sham then. Then he brings another raya to Tzemach Tzedek. Then he brings a raya from Tzemach Tzedek. He says, because the raya says that shinui mare is a psul hachoizer lech sheiroi. But she'uvim is not a psul achayzer l'chshere. Shinui Mare, the mikveh is a psul which goes back to being, go back to being kosher. But a she'uvim is not a mikveh which could go back to being kosher. So now he says, if there would be a way to make she'uvim back to kosher, then why did the Ravid say that it's not chayzer l'chshere? She'uvim should also be chayzer l'chshere. So obviously, from the Ravid, it's clear they didn't hold of this wine thing. And then he asks again, ultimately it's a derabanan. It should be the same din as tam yenim. He asks the same question again. And then he gives a svara. He says maybe because wine bittul could only work in something which is possible, which is treif. So you have stam yenim, that becomes bottle. Over here, the wine is davar heter. The water is a davar heter. You can't apply the din of bittul from heter to heter. Only works from asr to heter. But he concludes, he says, Mikol Makim, even though he brings a right that's a machzedek, he still paskins that you could be machshir with wine or thing. The most he says is this water, that you can't count this water, which you changed its color to the shear of 40 saw. So if you had 21 saw of rainwater, which became possible shleisha, and you added wine to change it, you have to add an additional 40 saw. That's how he paskins. Where does this whole minig of Barditchev come from? The swara of Barditchev. Now, you have to realize, this changing of she'uvim in the mind is not a question which came up in 200 years ago. It's way before that. We're going to get to soon to the raya of it. Elamai. There was an idea, in Barditchev this happened. There's a Shlomo Kluger who wrote many svarim. He wrote a sefer called Shiur Tahara. Shiur Tahara and Tshuva Lamed Hey. I printed it for you in this booklet. And he has a Tshuva, which, if you start in the second paragraph, in the second column, it's the old print in the second column towards the bottom, he has Masha Heil Din Heta Shvichas Yain Cholav Mikvah. Yeah. And he over there, he starts by saying, L'chayda from the Shulchan Aruch, it's mashma, it doesn't help to use wine or milk to change shuvim. Why? Because the Ramah in Siv Chavtes writes, like we said before, that if mikveh became possible from Shleish Lugim, if a mikveh of chaser became, which had wine in it and Shinui Mare, then if you add Shleish Lugim, it doesn't make it possible. And in Sif Chav Gimel, he says that if wine falls into Shleish Lugim and it changes, it doesn't make a mikveh possible. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention anywhere that if you have Shleish Lugim and you add wine to them in the mikveh, that you make it kosher. So Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention this idea. Obviously, this idea doesn't work. That's his first one. Then he says no. Midei Raisa, we know, it goes into a separate discussion. Hilchos Taruvos. Midei Raisa, we know, even according to Shittas Min B'Minoi is not bottle. We know if this Min B'Minoi mixture now gets mixed with a Min B'Sheinoi Minoi, that we say Silik Es Minoi K'mi Sheinoi, and the Einoi Minoi Ravo, all of them are vatlei. The Einoi Minoi overpowers the Min B'Minoi, and makes the whole thing bottom. So over here you have a mikveh, which you have shleish lugin, and now you have in it wine or milk that come into it afterwards. You could say that silik is a mikveh k'mishenai, silik the maim shuvim k'mishenai. And he says in the yain or milk and mevatel shuvim. No, it is. It's mashma. It's right. He doesn't say it clearly. You could understand it that way also. He doesn't say it clearly, but you could understand it both ways. You can understand it either way. And then he goes back to the question. Ultimately, he doesn't say it in Shulchan Aruch. So why doesn't it say in Shulchan Aruch? He gives a novel idea. It's so posh that you don't have to even mention it. So Shlomo Kluger writes. Why? Madach, when you have shuvim, shleish lugim, that they get wine into it, and you see the shuvim be'ein, it still becomes, but it still changes the status. For sure, if you have shuvim that are not bein, because you have a mikveh chasera, and shuvim fell into it, the shuvim are not bein, for sure the wine is going to change the status. So that's why Shulchan Aruch doesn't have to tell it to you. If it tells you that when you see the shuvim bein, it changes through wine, for sure. If you don't see the shuvim bein, for sure it changes. The wine for sure changes it. That's what the Shulchan doesn't even have to mention it. Then he says, you have another thing. We know kama bottle. That the first one, if you have on the bottom, whatever gets added onto it, kama bottle, the mevatel, the first one is mevatel, whatever falls into it afterwards. So he says, no, we know when a mikveh chasera, which became possible from Shlosh Lugin, what's the halacha? The halacha is milui void, right? And over there, we say that by putting in new water into it, all the possible water came out. According to science, it doesn't make sense. We say that that's how it's done. So he says, Shani Oimer, the same thing over here. Shani Oimer, that it changed. Even though you can say Kam, but I need the same, because we're Mako in She'uvim that made a mikveh apostle, a mikveh chaser apostle, we're Mako. We have a kula that we just, Shani Oimer, that it came out. That means we have to do an action that we can say that it changed. Over here also, we have to do an action we can say that it changed. Not that it actually changed. We do an action which we could say that it caused it to change. And the Shinui Mare right now, all it did is made it upon Chadashis and Numatzias, and therefore he says that you could even use these to be mashlam to Memsa. So if you have 21 Sa'ah of Meik Shamim inside this boy, which became possible from Shlosh Lugim, and you added wine, you changed the Mare, that now you could add more rainwater until it goes up to 40 Sa'ah, and you count to 21, not like the Gula Sirius was Machmer in the end. And he goes into the whole discussion, whether you count the wine as part of the Memsa or you don't, and at the end he finishes the Tshuva of Ein Pnai L'Harich Yosef, Al Kol Panim Adin Shekosavim B'tchila Hu Noch Lefinim Zdaiti, ובפרט דבעניין היין והחולב נהגו מכבר בקהילה קדושה ברדיצ'ב אשר גדולי הדור יושבו בו לפנים. This minhag of changing the wine, with changing a mikveh puzzle from she'uvim with wine or milk, nahagу b'kehila kodesh bardichev, where gdolei hador yoshev bo lefanim. In the previous generation, the Yitzchak of Bardichev was the Rav also, aside from being a Rebbe, and he was involved in some very serious shaylas, and l'cha'ira it's referring to him. So now we have a question: what are we going to do when you have? He says, so we know that if you add enough wine to just make a shinui mare, it doesn't help according to Tzemach Tzedek. But what happens now if you add so much wine that's not shinui mare, that it should make it bottle, it should become bottle. Now it's not the mikveh does not change its status because of shinui mare. It changes the status because of bittul. You add enough wine, there should be mevatel it. They'll still help. So you could say if you add a little bit of wine, a piece of water, you add a little bit at a time, it's common bottle. It becomes bottle. But if you add a lot in one shot, maybe it overwhelms what's in the mikveh. And now take doesn't change status. You can't say shinui mare doesn't change status, but maybe by adding a whole batch of wine into it, it does. Well, it's bittul b'rei, bittul b'shishim. We're not going to get into it now. So there are some opinions which hold that. The Oyer Meir Posen, he brings it in on Sif Chavtes. He brings in an idea, but I don't think there's no way to be makel against the Tzemach Tzedek, because the Tzemach Tzedek svara has nothing to do with shinui mare versus bittul versus anything else. The svara of Tzemach Tzedek is you can't make something puzzle into something puzzle. You can't change status of. You can only change status. Wine can only change status of any sort when it changes the status from one thing to another. So a mikveh, so we could say, even though Tzemach Tzedek doesn't write it clearly, doesn't write it, but we could say that the same way that a mikveh of a mikveh that nishtanu marav, that change of status does not change the status from mayim, she'uvim, cannot change the status after it already became possible. So too, this change of Rabbi of Mei Peres, Shar Mashkim, it's also a kind of psul, a category of a psul. You can't use that change of category of psul on top of another psul. We could tie psul and bittul to different things. We could. I'm saying we could do. We could look at it one. We could look at it the other way. But there's no achrav and there's no tzedek. You could say it one. We could say it the other way. So we can't be mekel. So what's the solution when you have a mine and you can't dry? What do you do? Say about trumas adeshin. Trumas adeshin is many years ago, in the beginning of the Achrayim. And he in Siman Reish Nun Ches, which you have over there towards the end of the tshuva, the last paragraph, he's matzia. You pour earth on top of all the openings of the mayan, because the mayan is coming in through as a stream. It's not so strong. And you do it gimel tfachim, and then you plug these with earth. And now it's dry. You're going to look over there. It's totally, you add enough earth to cover all the shleish halugim and to cover all the holes of the things. Now, what happens is you leave it there until the water of the mayan pushes through this earth and starts a new flow of a mayan. So now, the she'uvim which were inside the mikveh don't come back up. They got soaked into the earth and they're gone. Those she'uvim are soaked into the earth. And if you're going to say that it came up with the mayan, the mayan pushed up the she'uvim, two swadas rimatir. First of all, the main mayan is much more. Rabu olav, it's much more than the little she'uvim you had there. And second of all, there's earth, so that's fine. I just want to conclude. It's interesting. There's a Chuvas Tiferes, Tzvi Tiferes, from the Darkei Tshuva, from the one who wrote the Darkei Tshuva, the Munkacher. And I just printed one paragraph. The Divrei Masel Kayetz was a Shemaiti. He says that Divrei Chaim of Tzanz was very makpid not to be machsher any mikveh through wine or milk, only through earth. And the Divrei Chaim himself means this is what the Tzvi Tiferes writes in the Divrei Chaim. Did he heard the Divrei Chaim was machmer? What did the Divrei Chaim actually write was printed later. I think the Tzvi Tiferes did not see it. Very sharp. And this is in the last page that you have, the second to last page. The Chuvas Divrei Chaim, the newest print, has the Hoysofis, things they found in other Sfarim from the Chuvas and the Divrei Chaim that didn't make it into the Divrei Chaim Sefer. And it's in the Hoysofis and Chele Gimel and Siman Lamed Beis. And he says a story. There was this Rav in Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan Tov Reish Lamed Daled. There was a Rav by the name of Shmuel Aaron Rabin, the Rav of Karchin, who he wrote very famous word Beisad and Gittin, very famous sefer. He visited the Divrei Chaim, and that when he was there was a Rav who came to town and asked the Divrei Chaim whether you could be machshir through milk, and his answer was like this. He wrote a letter, Divrei Chaim, very short letter, very sharp, and with this we'll finish. ועל דבר אשר שואל מעלס כבוי תירוסי, הנני כויסב לוי, שמאוילום לנסעתי הסכומה להכשיר מקווה על אופן זה. אשר בדוי מליבם עמי הארוצס נבעורים מדס ותוירו אין בוהם. ורק כוי תעשו לתארם ולהכשירם. How do you do it? על פי המבור בשולחן ערוך. What's מבור בשולחן ערוך? That you have to drain it with kalim which have holes. You're going to get to it in the Sifra now. And in Trumas Hadeshim, which you just saw, that you add earth to it. That's practically the way to do it. You do it with earth. I don't think that I'm going to say that anybody who holds that it's wine is an amaretz. I can't use the same lashons as Divrei Chaim. But we follow some tzedek, and therefore that's how we do it.